And it is lovely to be here. And I'm always with the LDP, not all of you are in that, but I am aware that some of you know me much better than I know you. So I'm really happy to get the opportunity to at least see you and be with you during this time. So thanks for coming this evening. And before we sit, I do want to share with you, I know you've been on these Wednesday evenings, been the basis of the discussion, you might say. It sounds like it's been more far-ranging, but has been the hindrances. And I'm fortunate to be coming in right here at the pivot point as the orientation moves to the 7 factors of awakening. So this is the first evening in what will be a series from Jeanne primarily on the 7 factors. And I'd like to, I'm going to give later a little bit of an introduction to the 7 factors, and I'm going to emphasize one factor in particular, the factor of, it's dhammavicaya. It's translated sometimes as investigation. I like the words interest or intimacy, a kind of bringing of curiosity to what's occurring in the moment. So as we begin our sit, I'll give a little bit of guidance at the beginning to invite you into this particular quality, to sort of invite you to bring in dhammavicaya, and maybe I'll use that word some of the time to help you not have preconception around it, but to bring in this quality of interest. And it's a quality that I feel is foundational to our practice. It's what enlivens it. It's what makes it interesting. If without this, it can be a little, we can have a little bit of a feeling of been there, done that. You know, when you sort of sit down to meditate, if you sort of think, oh, I know what this is, I know how to do this, or, oh, I'm gonna not do this so well once again. You know, just sort of a kind of like plodding sense about it that especially can come if we've been practicing for a while. And so this quality of dhammavicaya is really what enlivens our practice and makes it interesting, exciting, leads in new directions. So as we sit today, I will just drop in a little bit of suggestion that I hope will help you bring that attitude. So I'm going to, you can go ahead and, it seems like you're in your sitting posture, so you can go ahead and make yourself comfortable in that way. And I'm going to begin with just a part of a poem that is from Rosemerry Wahtola Trommer, a poet that I often collaborate with. And the name of her poem is What the Guidebook Can't Tell You. I don't know the name of the flower about to bloom beside the trail, but it has the leaves of a lily and a single bud that hangs heavy off a long bent stem. Just as I don't know the name for the feeling I have when I want you to act a certain way, and I have not yet realized that my wanting is the problem. Neither of these things matter, the names, I mean. We like to think that by naming a thing, we know it. But I have stopped believing that. Whatever we can name, we start to overlook. So I think this is a good introduction to our practice right now. So allow yourself, as you settle in, as you feel your body, feel yourself in contact with the ground. And just start right there. I say contact with the ground. You've probably heard that many times. And take a few minutes. Take your time. What does that mean? to feel your contact with the ground. Perhaps feeling your feet. What is the contact with the ground like? And as you check, you might notice at first that it's quite vague. And then see if you can stay with it. Sense if there's pressure, sensations of different kinds, perhaps a weightedness. Is there some sense of the play between the sensations, the uprightness, you might say, of your lower leg and your foot as it contacts, balanced with the pull, this pull that creates pressure? And where do you sense that in your foot exactly? Is it in the toes or the ball of your foot? The heel? And resist if you can, even though I'm using words to communicate, resist the impulse to name it and sort of go, oh, okay, I got this. Instead, just let it remain unnamed, letting your attention move around with a kind of curiosity and not knowing, rather than a compulsion that you have to name it or know it. So more from the attitude of, I'm not sure I noticed this before. What am I noticing? And then allowing this inquisitiveness to not only include your feet, but to come to your buttocks, your thighs, whatever's in contact with your chair or sitting cushion. Feeling the pressure, the pull of the earth. And then notice you can switch your attention to the uprightness, perhaps feeling how your spine rises out of this pressure. Perhaps if your spine is free, if you're not leaning back, maybe rocking forward and back a little or to the sides, and just see how this pull of the earth affects you differently, how the pressure maybe changes. And then seeing what it's like if you rock forward and back and to the sides. What is it like when you're in a place of balance in the middle? How do you recognize that? And now let yourself take in the whole of your body. as you sit here. What can you notice? Places of relaxation, places of tension, places where there might be ease or discomfort, pressure or spaciousness, or any other of the infinite experiences your body is having. And see if you can just scan around being curious about all the different experiences that might be occurring. Sort of go to one and hang out a little and then move somewhere else without any need to change it, fix it, without any need to have an experience different than the one you're having. Instead, what is this experience? What is it like for you to be sitting here right now? How intimate can you be with this moment, this experience? Let yourself include the sensations of breath. What can you notice anew that perhaps without an attitude of you already know? We sometimes play that trick. What if this next breath was your very first breath? What would you notice about it? Notice the inhale and how profoundly different it is from the exhale. Allow yourself to include also your internal, emotional, mental, heartful state. Notice what's here. With less concern about naming it or figuring it out, and more with a kind of just gentle curiosity, the way you might kneel down to the ground and look carefully at a small flower that you have never seen before. What do you notice? And as you continue with your meditation, allow whatever arises to be known. Let it arise. You don't need to have a particular experience, but each thing that arises, a sensation in the body, a sound in your own environment, a feeling, even a thought as it passes by. Notice, be curious, and with a thought not about the content, but this amazing thing, the way something appears out of nothing, is here and then dissolves and disappears again. Stay with each arising, curious, intimate, allowing everything to be just as it is. So I'll begin my discussion, our introduction into the 7 factors, with a wonderful short poem that's from the collection of the Therigatha. This is the poems of the nuns that many of you might be familiar with. There's I think maybe even a non-devotee came and spoke to this group, did she? Yeah, so I'm sure she read from it. But maybe she did or didn't read this poem, but it'll have more meaning to you tonight. This is from Jenta, the Conqueror. I was forever getting lost until one day the Buddha told me, to walk this path, you will need 7 friends. For many years, these friends and I have traveled together, sometimes wandering in circles, sometimes taking the long way around. There were days when I thought I couldn't go on. There were days when I thought I was totally beaten. It's scary to give all of yourself to just one thing. What if you don't make it? Oh, my heart, you don't have to go alone. Train yourself to train just a little more gently. So this is a poem to the 7 friends. And the 7 friends are the 7 factors of awakening that will accompany you if you invite them. And the 7 factors show up in the Buddha's teaching very early on in his when he talks about the 4 noble truths. It shows up at the very end of his life. It's in one of the very last instructions he gives, is the 7 factors. It shows up a lot of places, and it's important. And it's important both in our sitting practice, but also in our lives. So I think this is a very, it's a very uplifting teaching and very useful. Bhikkhu Analayo, who I think you've heard Jeanne talk about, in his studies of the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, in which in the final foundation, which is the foundation of being mindful to dhammas, it's called, being mindful to the truth of the way things are. He says that in all the different versions of the sutta that appear in the Chinese and in the Pali, and that the 2 lists of things to pay attention to in that 4th foundation are the hindrances and the 7 factors. That some of the lists, the Pali version we have adds other things. In fact, it gets pretty carried away. It gets the whole Eightfold Path is in there and many other things. But Bhikkhu Analayo says, no, that's all been added. The 2 things that are fundamental there are the hindrances and the 7 factors. And I think in some ways that really simplifies it down. And that particular foundation, that seeing things through the dhammas or truths or reality unfolding. So what the invitation in the 4th foundation is to look at what's happening through the perspective. So you're bringing a certain kind, you're like bringing purposeful glasses. You're bringing a view to the situation. And you're not only, like in the meditation we were just doing, we were paying attention to what was happening, but there was a view, a set of glasses that I was inviting you to see through. And that was the one of interest or curiosity. And so we were bringing a certain approach to our practice. And this is the offering in this fourth foundation, is that we can bring the Dhamma, the what we know, what we learn from the teachings, we can bring that into our present moment experience. And through that, engage more skillfully. So as you were working with the hindrances, that you can just be wanting and wanting and wanting, but it changes the moment you recognize, oh, I'm wanting. So now there's a different experience going on. It's like another level. You're not just in the wanting, you're aware of that process unfolding. So the same thing is true for the hindrances all the way through and for the 7 factors, that we're not just being curious, but we're aware that we're bringing interest to the situation, to the moment-to-moment experience. And we actively engage in that way. So I want to name, though, the 7 factors. You probably heard them before, but just to bring them all into the room, bring our 7 friends here. So the first one is mindfulness. The second one is this quality of interest, dhammavicaya, as I've named. The third one is energy. And in this case, the Pali word virya. I kind of like sometimes saying that word virya. It's kind of got, you know, it's got some oomph to it. So virya. And then the next one is joy, which I understand you've been discovering. Jeannie's been working with how even the hindrances, when you turn and look at them, there can be delight and joy, and what a key aspect of our practice this is. That's sort of relates to what I was saying at the beginning, that I always come back to something Joseph Goldstein once said after, I mean, now it's even longer. I think when he said it, he'd been practicing for 40 years. And he said something to the effect that it's so exciting when I sit down to meditate, I have no idea what's going to happen. And so I just can be excited and interested and surprised every single time. Isn't that a wonderful attitude to bring to your practice? And that's what these 7 factors are inviting, that interest, that energy, the joy of it. So, and then to continue with the list, the next one is tranquility. And this quality of tranquility, there's many lists in the, where the Buddha lists very similar energy, joy, and sometimes he lists tranquility, and sometimes he lists a quality of sukha or happiness. I sort of like sukha, it's like sugar. So, and they take this same position in lists. And so I think it's very useful to remember that this quality of tranquility has a real contentment to it. That's really what the word sukha has as well. But this tranquility is that sense of relaxation, of ease. In some ways, it's the quality that many of us, when we come to our practice, are hoping for. Like just a break, you know, like just give me a little time off to just be settled and quiet and relaxed. So that's in this invitation as well. And then the next quality is concentration, samadhi. And I think probably, as all of you know, when we say concentration, we're talking about that collectiveness of the mind that is willing to stay put, that is not distracted and scattered. And this is very tied with that quality of contentment and tranquility, right? Because when the mind, like when it can just settle, you know, that difference between when you look at a beautiful sunset, and when you can stay with the sunset, when you can, your mind has a collectedness, a willingness to just stay there, that these other qualities all get amplified. There's ease and contentment, and there's joy, and there's curiosity. But in that whole mix is the ability to stay with what's in front of you. If you're watching a sunset and then you get all distracted because you need to take a picture of it, or you need to call somebody and tell them that they should go outside and look at the sunset, or you remember all the things that you should be doing instead of watching the sunset, it isn't happening, right? All those other qualities aren't going to have the opportunity to come in. So this quality of samadhi is really the ability to stay. And you can feel, as I'm talking, hopefully, how these different qualities support and mix with each other. It's inherent in each one of them, how it needs the others. And this leads then also to the seventh quality of equanimity. And when all of these qualities are here, there's a steadiness, a collectedness, a willingness to be with all that happens. And this is in some ways a beautiful fruit of our practice, that we can be in the midst of our breath or an agitating event or the sunset, and there can be just a steadiness, of being with it without grabbing a hold, without wanting more of it, without agitating, without pushing away. In other words, to be able to be there with a steadiness and a settledness that doesn't have the hindrances coming in again. So these 7 factors, and there's a couple different ways that they can be viewed, these 7 friends. One is sort of as a progression, and you might have been able to hear as I was naming them, that it starts with mindfulness, that first you got to be paying attention or nothing's going to happen, right? You got to be here. And then from that, you get curious. And then because you get curious, there's more energy. Oh, I'm curious about this. And then with that increased energy, there's delight. And then with the delight comes contentment, because you don't need something else to be happening. There's a willingness to be with what's here. And that is deeply settling. We're no longer looking for something other than here. And when we stay here, the tranquility, the being here, allows the mind to focus and settle and stay with what's here. And all of this then leads to that steadiness as I described it. So this is one way that it unfolds, as a progression. Another way that these 7 factors are understood as that they balance each other. So mindfulness is sometimes talked about as being in the middle. It's like a teeter-totter, and mindfulness is in the middle, supporting everything. And then on one side are the 3 what are called arousing factors. In other words, they bring more oomph, more juice to the practice. So that would be the interest, the energy, and the joy. So these arouse, they bring up, they entice us. And then on the other side of our teeter-totter here are the 3 tranquilizing or settling or calming factors. And that would be the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity. And you can feel how those 3 factors have a different quality than the other 3, that they have more of this containment, this contentment, satisfaction, undistractedness. So as a basic guide, these back and forth between the arousing and the calming is just a very basic, useful framework for our practice and for as we do something in our lives. You might notice something as simple as if you're doing a task, say you're weeding. I have a garden behind me, so I can use weeding, or maybe you can use washing the dishes. Who doesn't wash dishes, right? If you don't, raise your hand, I'll send some of mine your way. But so say you're washing dishes, and at the middle, there has to be mindfulness. And the more mindfulness, the more it's a practice. And if there's no mindfulness, you're going to break dishes. But then at the other end is where you're really staying connected with what you're doing. And when you're staying connected, then you might start to notice that, oh, the way I'm doing these dishes, like I'm kind of just not quite, I'm not that interested. I'm not noticing the warmth of the water. I'm not noticing. And so I can bring more interest in, oh, I can feel the warmth of the water, what the soap feels like, what it feels like to move my arm, and the delight as the pile of wash dishes outpaces the other dishes. But also you might notice if you get all involved in that you're just going to be a little bit, you might start to get sort of quick and agitated, or a little bit, how do I say? It's like really juicy, but there's not a sense of calm and ease with the process. So then you can bring in, oh, maybe if I just slow down a little and take a little bit more a sense of ease and contentment with this. The example that is, I think it was Buddha Dasa that gave the example. He said and that I was using dishes because very few of us are plowing fields. There are some here who are plowing fields, I'm aware. But he said that you needed all 7 factors if you were working with a couple of steers pulling your plow, that you had to have the interest, you had to be paying attention, you had to have energy, and energy as you hold on to the plow, you have to be delighting in what you're doing so that your mental state is good, and yet you need to have a real steadiness and focus. So he used the example of plowing for saying that when we do things in our lives, we need to have, and the more complex the task is, right, the more all the factors have to be there. So it can be viewed as an instruction in life, and it's very much viewed as an instruction in our meditation. There's let's see if I can find it. This is from the Buddha. He says, just as bhikkhus, which is meditators, practitioners, just as practitioners, in a peaked house, all rafters whatsoever go together to the peak, slope to the peak, join in the peak, and of them all the peak is reckoned chief. Even so, practitioners, the practitioner who cultivates and makes much of the 7 factors of wisdom slopes to Nibbana, inclines to Nibbana, tends to Nibbana. So what he's saying here is that it is the balancing, the bringing in, the cultivation of the 7 factors of awakening that lead us towards awakening, that lead us towards insight, to understanding, that these are what set up the conditions that allows our practice to unfold. Sometimes you may have heard that we can't make insight happen, but by cultivating our practice, and that insight happens it's an accident. We can't make it happen. It's just an accident that occurs. But by cultivating our meditation practice, we become accident prone. And the 7 factors are what we are cultivating to create the conditions for those insight accidents to occur. So that's what the general overview, I would say, of the 7 factors. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, that I wanted to say a little bit more about this first one, the interest, the dhammavicaya. And there's a couple different ways one can approach the dhammavicaya. One is a little bit as I was inviting you in the meditation, that it's an invitation to look at what's happening more closely, with more interest, curiosity, intimacy. And I know all of you have received the instructions again and again that, like, if you have a big emotional thing happening or you've got a hindrance coming up, that one of the things we do, right, is pay attention to what's happening in the body. We pay attention. Where do I feel tension? What is feeling in my gut? What's happening in my heart? When we do that, when we pay attention in that way into our bodies, we're bringing in that quality of dhammavicaya. A lot of the instructions that you have received over time with meditation are the instructions that increase dhammavicaya. So, you know, paying attention to the inhale more particularly and the exhale, paying attention to what, if you've ever practiced with Vedana, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, that's a kind of paying attention more intimately. And when you do that, you arouse this interest. So this paying more particular attention is a very skillful way that we can work with dhammavicaya. Another way that we can work with it is to look with interest at a particular aspect. So in this case, we're not just so much being interested to what is here, but we're looking in a particular way. And actually the Vedana, looking at pleasant and unpleasant, is a little bit that way. That we're looking and being interested in a particular aspect. And the classic ones that we can do in this way are looking at suffering. So we can look at a given moment and notice, are we suffering in this moment? Is there a cause to the suffering? Is there an opening by which this could be relieved? So we're working with the 4 Noble Truths. So we can, now we're being interested in what's happening in a particular way. So this is how we can say we start getting interested in a particular area of the Dharma or of our lives. We can be interested in that way in. So for instance, another list you might be familiar with, have worked with at some point, is the paramis. Like you might decide at some point that one of the first parami is generosity. And you start bringing this interest in how generosity arises in you, how you are affected by it, how it plays out, how you resist it. So now your dhammavicaya is looking through a particular Dhamma lens. And the lenses of the Dhamma that you can look through are infinite. So there's all the paramis, and then I started to say there's the suffering. And another classic way of looking is looking at impermanence. That's a way of guiding the dhammavicaya, guiding the interest, and directly seeing how things arise and how they pass away. And then another of the third ways of seeing is the anatta, not self, seeing the way things arise and pass in an impersonal way. And you may, if as I'm talking, you may start to recall, I won't try to list them all, that we give various instructions that are instructions of that are integrating dhammavicaya, this quality of interest in them. In fact, the foundational instruction is always trying to orient, to interest us, to bring something to engage us with what's happening. And you might, this is a really good quality to bring to mind, because sometimes we can have the experience, it's not uncommon, is that we feel kind of stuck in our practice, or it's starting to feel routine or mundane or boring, or, you know, any other, where we just fall asleep a lot. And this is the quality that we can turn towards to help bring some zest back to our practice. And we can choose how we do that, through one of these lenses that I mentioned, the Dhamma lens, or just being more curious about what's happening in a given moment. One of the interesting ones, just to relate it to the hindrances that you've been playing with, for instance, when you have sloth and torpor, when you're really sleepy, one of the most amazing experiences can be when you get really, really interested in the experience of sleepiness. And you're like with it, and you just can feel like the heaviness, and you feel this weight in your eyes, and you can feel this torporous feeling in your mind, but you're paying really careful attention to it all. And as you stay being really intimate with it all, sometimes you might even sense as you start to drift off to sleep, or other times, or you might drift and then come back, but you might notice that all of a sudden you're not so sleepy, because what's happened is you've cultivated this arousing factor, and now you've gotten very curious about what's happening. And the sleepiness has relieved itself. And this is with the balancing factors. Sometimes, for instance, being so incredibly curious about restlessness might not be as useful, because what's happening, if you get more and more curious about restlessness, right now we've got an arousing factor meeting a hindrance that's already overactivated. So now we're getting really curious and really amped about something that's amped, and we may find ourselves crawling out of our skin. So this is where it can be useful to say, oh, okay, restlessness, maybe in this case, I either need to be aware of the restlessness in a different way that doesn't amplify the restlessness. Perhaps there's a way I can notice it. For me, the way I notice it is as this energy that's coming out, but I don't focus on the restlessness in my body, because I notice if I focus on the restlessness in my body, it amplifies. But if I just notice it as like this energy behind the thoughts, that works. But it might be more skillful to choose something from the calming side, and instead of bringing in a bunch of dhammavicaya in that moment, focus on the calming quality of the exhale and the soothing and the relaxing of it. So perhaps you're starting, I'm encouraging and hoping that you can start to sense how the 7 factors and the conditions that are arising, the hindrances, might interact. And something else I wanted to say about dhammavicaya. I think that for me, and that's probably why you can hear the enthusiasm for me, dhammavicaya has been the sustaining quality in my practice. That's what keeps me going. And particularly on retreat, where the dhammavicaya helps bring these qualities, particularly of concentration. Because if you're interested, you're not distracted. I was thinking of somebody recently who's been practicing a while, and they just said, God, I sit down and my mind just keeps thinking. I just keep thinking. And we all have this experience at times. And the question that comes up can be, how do I address this? Can be addressed in so many different ways. One is, are you attached to your thinking? Do you think you're going to think a thought that you've never thought before? So that's more approaching it from the hindrance side of like seeing, is there wanting? Is there aversion that's playing through? And noticing that. But then we can also approach it from, oh, maybe I haven't chosen. I haven't directed myself and become interested in the meditation itself. I haven't yet committed and gotten curious. So is there something I can be curious about? And some of you who have practiced with me, I find that for many of us, being interested in the body. And this is where many of you also probably have found that having guided meditations at times can be helpful, because a guided meditation keeps orienting your interest. It's keeping you interested in a particular way. And so that can help navigate us through this arena. So that's the general territory I wanted to share with you this evening. Okay, I'm going to read you a final poem to send us out. To look at anything. To look at anything. If you would know that thing, you must look at it long. To look at this green and say, I have seen spring in these woods, will not do. You must be the thing you see. You must be the dark snakes of stems and ferny plumes of leaves. You must enter into the small silences between the leaves. You must take your time and touch the very peace they issue from. It's from John Moffat. So enjoy entering the small silences between everything. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.